Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm going to speak English. If I speak too fast, tell me to slow down. If you have any questions, you can also ask in German. I can speak German as well. My name is John Gilardi. I'm the head of corporate communications and investor relations for Qiagen, which is a Dutch company. We're involved in molecular diagnostics. It's actually one of the two success stories in Germany after the Second World War in terms of growth, capitalization, surviving the Neue Markt. The other one would be SAP. In terms of market cap, we're about $6 billion. We're a truly global company with global shares. We actually listed in the United States in 1996 before there was an ADR program. And we also trade here in Frankfurt. We're one of the largest companies in the tech DAX. So just to give you a little bit of perspective. The topic I chose today was corporate communications and IR, friends, foes, or frenemies. And the reason I chose it is because my background is in journalism. I started out in journalism. That's how I came to Germany with Reuters as one of the correspondents here in Frankfurt. And then I had different jobs over the next, say, 15 years in investor relations and corporate communications over the years. So I wanted to just point out a couple of people I'll talk about during the presentation. Paul Argenti is one of the top experts in terms of corporate communications, teaches in the MBA program at Dartmouth. Nancy Hobart teaches where I went at Northwestern. She was the head of communications and investor relations at a company called Gaylord. And she's one of the visionaries I have in terms of really creating integrated teams. Because I think the shock you'll get today is the talk about going to integrated communications teams is going back to the way it was many years ago. We'll also talk here about Matthias Hensel. He was my first boss at BASF when I made the switch to corporate communications. Together we wrote the first one-voice policy in Germany in 1998. One-voice policy, today it's dead. You can't do it. You can't do it today with the speed of communications today and the diversity of the stakeholders that your company is engaging with. Fried Marnusch was my boss at Aventis, and Arvind Sood was my boss there too. We worked, he was the head of communications, he was the head of investor relations. And here's where we learned communication. I learned communication strategy and how to harmonize these teams together when you have different functions. Carsten was my colleague in communications there. He's now the head of communications at Henkel. He and I are sparring partners about what is the role of communications, what's the role of IR, where's that dividing line between the two? How can you make these teams work together? It's not about structures, it's about people. Carl was my sensei. He's the guy who taught me also at Aventis. He's very clear, has a very clear view. IR does what IR does, PR does what PR does, and let's just kind of separate it. You know, it depends on the organization you're with. But Anne was my boss at Novartis, where I was for 6 years in Basel. I got to tell you, the Swiss are the better Germans. They really, yeah, they are. And Anne was the first manager I ever had who was a general manager. She had no communications experience, none at all. She was an engineer, and this is what you're going to see more of happening here in Germany, the trend in the United States. Integrated communications functions with general managers on top until the IR or PR experts with general management experience can move to the top and take over both roles. And then Bob is a guy I work with at Novartis, and he is the guy who really taught me about the speed at which messages are moving today and the diversity of stakeholders and how trying to talk with one voice as an organization, trying to control what you're saying through PR or IR is just bound to fail. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. And then Felix worked with me at BASF, now he's at Continental. He's the guy who taught me a lot about general management as well with Anne in terms of the soft skills, because the higher you go in an organization into these VP or senior VPs in these organizations, the less it is about functional expertise. It's about soft skills. It's about how you can integrate and work with a senior management team and become a strategic advisor. How you can go beyond your own functional area, and instead of them telling you what to do, they start asking you questions. And you get engaged in those discussions. That's where the real value comes from. That's where the real contributions to the organization begin. But in terms of people who shaped my life, I'm going to start with my dad. I don't like PowerPoint bullets on slides, so there's no one slide with a PowerPoint bullet. It's my dad, that's my mom. She's not important in the story, he is. Because he taught me what's called Miles' Law. And Rufus Miles was the Secretary of War during the Second World War. And what he said is that where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit, because they're trying to figure out why different partners among the Allies, the Soviets, the British, and the French, all were taking these contradictory positions in all these fights. And they said, depended on where they sat at the table and the issue, the perceptions they were trying to represent and why that was the motivation behind their positions. So if you think about it in an organization, there's a big round table and there are all these stakeholders talking in that. And sometimes we forget that when you work in investor relations because we're used to this kind of bilateral dialogue with investors. There's a larger table where all these people are talking to each other. So think about that. And that's what my dad was trying to tell me, because personally, your role at the table is going to change from being the journalist to the IR guy to the PR guy to the internal comms guy, maybe CFO, maybe CEO, you never know. Because he started off as an auditor at Pete Marwick, then he became a consultant, then he was the head of controlling at a big university medical center, then he was the CFO. And his view around that table changed depending on where he sat. And the same thing applies to you in your IR role, or if you've ever had another corporate role, the views you take on these different topics you deal with as a company changes. So that's the key point. So clearly, the customer is king, the regulators make the rules. This is where you get your license to operate as a company. Because without that license to operate, without people who will buy your products, you don't have a business. You have other stakeholders, journalists, NGOs, non-government organizations, your auditors, your consultants, different external people who have a voice at the table, your competitors as well. Think about shareholders. They have a big seat at the table. We always worry about what do they say? What are the equity investors going to say? But if you think about it, it's the sell-side analysts, it's the credit agencies, debt investors. They're also part of that discussion at the table about what a company is doing and how it's perceived and how it should move forward. So the CEO obviously has the big seat at the table, and the other functions are there. Sales, marketing, the CFO, human resources. These are all strategic functions. So IR went to seat at the table. They claim they're strategic, so vital to the organization. If Kay was here, I'd tell him, actually, I disagree. I don't think IR as a standalone function is a strategic function. I don't think so. I think it's too narrowly focused. I think it's a subset of overall communications in an organization. So the communications guys also want to see, can both be strategic? It's not a question of, to me, of size. It's not that it becomes strategic at a much bigger company. Qiagen has 3 operating businesses, 35 countries around the world. We have 4,500 people, but it's still as complex division-wise or organizationally-wise as Novartis. So what makes difference in size? Nothing. But my view is that the stakeholder roles are too fragmented, but together they become strategic. So the question is, how do you build that strategic link with your communications partner? How many people in the room have communications as part of their mandate? Corporate communications. 2. How many only have IR only? How many are not in the IR roles? No, what are you doing then? Yeah, okay. What? PR only, PR only. Who has PR only? Public relations only? 1. So many companies still have separate teams. They seek this alignment, they collaborate. One reports to the CEO, one reports to the CFO. But the success comes down to the people. It's not about structures and rules. When I was at BASF, the CEO and the CFO really didn't click very well then, and it got translated down the line. Carson and I got along very well when we were both in IR, PR roles at a very much a working level at Aventis, but it got reflected up the line too. So it's always about people. But far too often, the team collaboration feels like this, pulling back and forth. Who's in charge of the issue? Who's in charge of the M&A project? Who's going to drive this? So the messages get out of balance. They get out of whack. They get too skewed towards one stakeholder over the other. And this is what I'm talking about. You lose the consistency of pulling things together so that you get a much more harmonized view. You'll never get one voice. You'll get a harmonized message. People, when they're singing in harmony, are not necessarily singing at the same pitch, if I get this right, but it sounds in harmony. It doesn't dissonate. It doesn't cling the wrong way. Because the new trend is integrated teams, regardless of size, to capture the synergies. You engage the stakeholders. That's what attracted me to going to Qiagen, because the mandate was to bring together IR, PR, and internal comms, and now expand out into other function areas. And I can say this is a trend in the United States. It's only for smaller mid-cap companies, but Fresenius adopted this model in 1999. And I guarantee you, you'll see at the end, I'll make the prediction, The head of IR role is going to disappear in Germany as a direct CEO, CFO level, reporting level in 10 years. At the most of the companies in Germany, it's going to disappear. And it's going to get absorbed into a larger corporate affairs type reporting role model. Is it a new trend? No. This is an article from IR magazine back in 2003. IR, corporate communications, are both. Yeah? Talking about these communications, above all, they're now putting one person in charge. 2003, it's 12 years ago. So this is the trend you're seeing. You think it's new because you see other companies going to it, but actually it's been around for a while. So we're going to go back full circle, actually, to a slide I'll get to later, from the trend you saw in the 1980s, where IR and PR were all part together of one team. So the turf wars are tiring. I think we can all agree with that. The rivalry, the frictions, it reduces the credibility for everybody at the table. Sometimes I feel we spend more time arguing with each other in these situations than we do dealing with the external stakeholders. That's the concern I have a lot of the time. So my call to action to you is get prepared for integrated teams. I think the trend's coming here to Germany. Yeah, Germany is very strong, ahead of the curve on IR. It's taken out of a fast follower situation from the United States and gotten a lot better than them. As a much stronger mandate, a much stronger position in organizations here. You gotta remember, I've been working here for 20 years. I've never worked in the United States since 1994. Bill Clinton was president when I left the United States. But it's about taking the first step to them. Learn the other communications roles. You have to learn the other communications disciplines to get these to run these large integrated teams. People think, you'll see sometimes for these job advertisements for these roles, it'll say IR experience mandatory. But I can point to 2 or 3 examples of guys that I know who got these jobs, including the guy at the head of GSK. GSK has an integrated communications team where the head is the former head of media relations, and he's never been an IR officer at the company. Because you're going to need this for your career going forward. So I have 3 reasons why I think that it's time to take action and really start to think about these integration approaches, whether it's informal or whether it's something more formal in terms of where things are going. Number 1 is the speed. The news is traveling far too fast for a one-voice policy. I'm going to give you a case study, an example about how fast things are moving. So back in 1998, pre-internet world, this was the cover slide that I had to present to the Vorstand about creating a one-voice policy for BASF with Matthias. The goal was to get the PR and media relations team and the IR team starting to talk to each other, so that people stopped doing trade media interviews in the middle of a quiet period and talking about their performance on a quarterly basis before we announced anything outside. Talking about when are they going to be on investor roadshows, what are the messages they're going to say. What sounds kind of simple now, back then, it felt like we were trying to, end Soviet-US Cold War tensions at times. The way we talked about it then in justification is that these audiences, these stakeholders are starting to come together, the speed at which information was getting around. And it's funny to look at the slide when you think about terms like Quotron, or which doesn't exist anymore, CNN-FN, or even InfoSeek, Netscape. If I did this test with most of the people in the room, I wonder if they would know what that symbol is. Yeah? There once was another browser besides Internet Explorer. Now, as we were talking about back then, is this explosion and the impact of media, and how do we talk with a consistent voice outside? We talked about the fact that these groups, even though you had a difference in terms of the audiences, they were interacting, so we had to start talking more to each other too. Yeah, this was pretty revolutionary back then. But now we live in this world. The external discussions, the speed at which information moves around, moves in ways we never imagined back then. Lacking the complete alignment is just a recipe for disaster. And we see it day in, day out from some of our communications colleagues. What's great about this photo is that you see the Bloomberg, you see the Reuters here, but you see the newspapers, you see TV, you see the internet, you see the linking of everything together. It's not just that everything's moving on the wires now or on the tape. You see that the guy is relying on all these things and he's bringing it all together so easy, so quick, so fast. Anyone can share their views with everyone. One person can share their views with the entire world, courtesy of Twitter or Facebook now, at no cost. This is a slide from 2009 talking about the response time. Talking about minutes from a corporate perspective. Minutes, my God, it's down to seconds. And I'll show you the case study to terrify you. In terms of commentary, we're now here, what? Millions? Yeah? Contributors? How many? I don't know. I've lost track. So here's an example, case study. Quest Diagnostics is a laboratory supply company in the United States, a laboratory services company. Market cap of probably about $20 to $40 billion. Okay? One of the 2 largest laboratory companies in the United States. Some guy put out a tweet last Friday, good timing for me for my presentation, that said, rumor that Goldman Sachs, GS, in talks to handle strategic review for DX, for Quest Diagnostics. Within minutes, the stock hit 10% move up, hit the trading restriction, so they put it in a cool down period. After the cool down, up to 20% spike. Just off of one guy, one tweet from a rank and file private options trader. The out of the money calls went from 70 cents down here to $7. Somebody made a lot of money. Now the scary part is this is the 4th time this type of game has been played on a US stock during this year.
On a US stock or on this US stock?
On a US stock. Because this is the new game in terms of inflicting volatility into the market. And again, it wasn't Dow Jones, it wasn't Reuters, it wasn't the Journal, it wasn't CNBC. It was a simple, regular options trader who put out a Twitter flash or a tweet with the stock ticker tag. So this guy, his name is Joe Kunkle, Options Hawk. It's the guy who caused this. He said, Bloomberg cleared up the mistake. I didn't say that. He pulled his tweet off the wire right away, even though they could pick it up off the cage. Then he said, stock's still up $7, still in the on the money calls are still staying bid. So it's not me. I didn't do it. Bloomberg has got their thumb somewhere trying to figure out where the story is. Because, go back to this, look at the money that's being made. And if you're an IR, PR communications person, what are you going to do? Do you think you have time to call up your colleague in communications and say, geez, maybe we should sit together and figure out how we're going to communicate and what's going to be our one voice policy of response to this statement? And then you call your boss, I call my boss, and then we'll get together and talk about it. Because the stock is moving up and down like a rocket. The company never tweeted anything. They decided not to tweet anything. They didn't put out a statement. Callers just got an answer that said, we don't comment on market rumors or speculation, which I think was the right thing to do. Don't fall for the bait, don't fall the trap. But what's your process to figure that out? What if your PR team, if you're the IR guy, and your PR team starts talking to the people? Are they trained to stop? Yeah. But think about organizationally, how fast you have to move now to be able to respond to these things. The speed at which things move is death-defying. Because what can happen is what happened to sometimes is the stock gets up here so bid that companies are forced, they have no other choice but then to start to review strategic options. That's how dangerous and fast news can move. The second point is engagement. Your investors are talking to their stakeholders, and they're talking to their stakeholders all the time. This interaction of these groups outside of our control, outside these corporate environments, has picked up dramatically. It goes beyond just the paid consultants. It's terrifying to me sometimes to meet our customers who are paid consultants of the money bags on Wall Street, who are getting paid to give their views on our products in their laboratory or getting called out to shill for their products. It goes beyond that. It's about talking about looking at employees, NGOs. Everybody else is talking about you, but you are not necessarily part of that conversation. And you're only hearing one part of it. Your communications people are hearing another part of it, and they actually have more control over that overall conversation than you do. So it's in your best interest to be listening to what they're saying and get that information. So let's go back to the IR basics. Stock price is about performance plus perception. And you and IR can pick up part of this perception, but a lot of this perception is driven by what the PR team is doing, communications team is doing, yeah? Also your marketing team, you can think about it too, because I'll tell you one thing is some of these roles where people have IR over top of them, they take in marketing communications as well. They take in branding. That's the next step that we're looking at for my team. And this perception, though, is the area where I think the IR people have the least amount of control overall in terms of the mandate, Gesundheit. So performance-related variables, this is the bread and butter of IR discussions. All your different metrics, your attractiveness, your dividend yield, pulling out your dog and pony book, and going through your presentation. But the non-financial factors are becoming more and more an influence on overall valuation. This is Barak Lev from NYU. He's the one who came up with this view that 35–40% of the valuation comes from these non-financial factors in terms of management quality, customer satisfaction, what's the risk, sustainability, all these soft factors that people, IR people don't like to talk about. Well, where do you get management quality? You get it from your interviews and your media outlets. What's the timing? What are the messages going to be? Who are you talking to? What are they trying to say through that to different stakeholders? That's where you can start to use the media or these devices as ways to steer what you're talking to in terms of different channels to different stakeholders. Because here's that discussion going on with all these people. And if you think about employees, I was just reading this morning, what are they saying on Kununu and Glassdoor about us? In terms of those employee satisfaction levels and where they face vis-a-vis where we are. You have your unions or your Betriebsrat, you have your local communities in terms of your ability, you have your NGOs. All these people are actually, you think they're just talking through you, they're talking to each other. Yeah? So how do you get part of that? How do you bundle your resources as an organization to do that? Because getting these people being able to talk now with the internet is getting so easy, because this chart is hard to read, but these are all the different channels now that are out there to talk, that people are talking through. And right here, this is Facebook, these kind of things here. Then you have Twitter, then you have, these are all the different channels. What's a channel in China? Anybody know what it's called? How do people talk to each other in China? What's it called, Yabber? Yeah? They don't even use our stuff. So what are they saying about your products in China? These are the terrifying things. And so this is the thing about, what's interesting though, is that all these digital channels are ways for people to talk about it. And on top of that, we have disclosure. And even disclosure is changing for us about how we disclose news. Twitter and Facebook are now considered Reg FD compliant disclosures in the United States. I don't need PR Newswire anymore. How much money can I save a year not putting stuff over PR Newswire? Because all the tweets go automatically now into the Google search. Yeah? The PR Newswire models get to die out. I don't need them. And even you have companies going to Pinterest. You have companies going to, what's not on here is, because it's probably too old, this picture I stole off the internet, is Snapchat. Snapchat's a new way that people are communicating. The bankers love it because the stuff blows up and there's no tracking afterwards. But if you go back to the chart I had here, what's at the core here is what we're taking as the approach. We're aligning all of our communications to all the different stakeholders around the brand promise. So this idea of trying to take a one-voice approach and try to say, okay, well, here's the IR messages and here's the PR corporate messages, and let's try and find a middle ground. We've kind of given up on that. And what we did is we said, let's put the brand at the beginning, the brand promise, and the brand, what we're about as a company, and then we communicate that out to the stakeholders. Then we can be in harmony. Then we know we're synced up. It may not be the same message to every audience, but we know that we're going to avoid the conflicts and the issues, the friction points that cause people to look and wonder what's going on here as a company. Why are they hearing different stories? So as an example, here's a Qiagen case study. A year ago in the summer, we started to get really frustrated with the branding of the company. We had some sales and marketing teams coming to us from a subsidiary that we had bought, and they said, when we switched into your colors and your branding, our sales leads went down 30%. And then we looked at it and we said, oh yeah, we're tired of these photos. We're tired of, this kind of thing, the whole image, the blue bars. And people said, yeah, let's just get rid of that. But then from a strategic communications perspective, not IR, not corporate communications, not internal, but as a holistic communications, we said, the company is changing too fast. The company has changed a lot. We've moved away from just being a lab supplier and more towards offering these automated solutions to help people find the value, the insights out of DNA samples. Yeah? If you think about Angelina Jolie with the BRCA1/2 test that she had, and she took the prophylactic step to have a mastectomy and have all these against this cancer risk, that's based on a test and equipment supplied by Qiagen. So where are we in terms of how our positioning? So we said from a communications perspective, well, let's think about where we are. We felt that we were much more of a rational, technical sale in terms of how we were also perceived. We wanted to become much more about solutions, emotion engaging, how we wanted to be perceived. But instead of just looking at this like as a simple branding exercise, we looked at it because of being integrated across all the different stakeholders. The advertisements changed. That's the current view, the old. And now we're much more engaging, open, people, style. Take care of the advertising stakeholder group. We went back and reset the framework of the company. We talked to overall, we said, we're going into a new strategic phase. We talked about resetting, we reset our vision, our mission, our vision. What are we trying to do? We emotionalized it, making improvements in life possible, about making an impact on human life through the power of molecular insights. Yeah? That applies to all stakeholders. We created all the materials we need to roll this out to all the different stakeholder groups. From a different, again, a holistic approach to all stakeholders, from sales marketing through to the secretaries who need the business cards. And the irony is, the day we announced it was the day of the biggest investor conference in our industry, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco, because we wanted to have the biggest impact, ironically, on the financial community to signal to them strategic shift in the company, moving in a new direction, and we changed the visuals as an outcome to give them a signal of the change. And because we're also taking a strategic view at communications and not locked in these silos anymore, especially when you think about the IR team that creates the annual report, which is a 300 book that nobody ever reads. We took the courage, listening to somebody in my team, and we blew up the annual report. We killed it. We killed it. We had the financial part, the 200 pages financial part, which is based on our 20F filing, meets all those regulatory obligations, and instead, we created a customer magazine. Took that money, repurposed it as a customer magazine, put it on top of the financials, but the magazine is not meant for shareholders or retail shareholders to read, it's meant for our customers to read. Yeah? And repurpose that money. So you can see that was what we wanted to do in terms of taking a much more holistic view of reaching these people, and again, synchronizing everything around our brand. Whenever we're questioning how we want to position things, we go back to our mission statement and go back to that as a foundation in terms of how we want to message different topics. So reason number 3 is your future. I think, just to give you something provocative, I think the head of IR seat at the table is going to disappear. Anybody disagree with me? Disagree? Okay. Only one? Nobody's got Kurt? Okay. So here's the quiz. 1984, how many Fortune 500 companies had their own IR department? What do you think the number is?
250.
No, 50%. Okay. Another number. Come on, guys. I get the after breakfast crowd or after lunch crowd.
10%.
10? Closer. It's 16%. Only 16% of the Fortune 500 back then had their own IR department. Now it's, 100% probably. The PR function actually was founded in the 1920s. In terms of the Edelman, the Fleischmans, the Hilliards, that started the industry years ago. Actually, the industry, the PR industry, the publicity industry for corporates actually came out of Broadway. A lot of the guys, if I think about David Finn, These guys, they were old Broadway publicity guys that made their way into corporate environment. And this guy is Lou Thompson. I don't know if any of you have met him. He's the old president of the National Investor Relations Institute in the United States. He's retired now. And he wrote, he's a big advocate of integrated teams. He doesn't understand why companies have separated teams, why they went years ago and separated them out, and now this discussion is to bring them back together. Because he says, we're going full circle back, because if this is the speed at which our stakeholders are getting information, and this is the way they're communicating with each other, why are they structured like this? This still just doesn't make sense to me. It's not a question of size. It's not an issue of management control. It's not an issue of the importance of hearing what investors say at the table. It's just, to me, honestly, an outdated organizational structural issue that's going to change over the next 10 years. Because let's face the facts, IR is just one type of communication as to how a company communicates. And the environment we're seeing right now demands more than just this informal collaboration we're hearing, we talk about. It means moving towards integration, unified teams, and seeing a new generation of leaders come forward that can bundle all of this together into one team. And the biggest company I've seen do it so far in Germany is Oliver at Fresenius. So let's go through a different approaches you see out there. So this is what I call the only IR really matters. This is where your CEO, you have a VP of corporate communications and IR, but it's really just IR in general. It's kind of what you see at the more smaller companies. But again, you always hear, it's good for small companies, not for big ones. And I disagree. This is this partner and other function approach you see some companies taking. This is this informal networking where the IR person focuses on, he has the link to PR and he has this link over to marketing. This is your kind of your classical. I think you can strike that one out eventually. Usually you have the CFO directly reporting to that person. This is where you see splitting up stakeholders. Here you see where everybody over here worries about IR, and everybody else over here worries about your standard corporate communications. You can see down here, internal communications, employee type stuff, visual types. This is your internal comms team. This is your marketing communications, media relations, that type of team. And this is your lobbyist, but the IR person just kind of, he takes care of IR directly and kind of delegates a bit off the other stuff. It's a big kind of our model in a sense that I spend 60% of my time dealing with IR work. Then I have somebody who takes care of all the public relations. I have somebody who takes care of the internal communications, and then I have somebody who takes care of what I would call content and channel management. Somebody's in charge of corporate publishing, working against those channels, where they can create the content to put into a company magazine, or put into a Twitter feed, or into Facebook, or into the annual report, or that story that goes into an investor slide deck, so that we can create that interaction and syndicate content. And then you go to this model, we have one team for all stakeholders, where you have one head of communications, and these teams, regardless of the stakeholder they're dealing with, they just deal with those people outside. This is kind of, I don't think it's going to go this far, that you have a person who can really handle day in, day out the IR questions, plus the media questions, plus dealing with employee communications. This kind of wonder triangle of experience, I don't think you're going to find. But you start to see that people, this is a company called Diebold in the United States, that they've really moved beyond integration of the roles, that they really work as one team going outside and cross-fertilizing the people, moving people between these roles so that they learn how to deal with the outside stakeholders.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The question is regarding reporting lines.
Mm-hmm.
Because very often it is the case that IR reports to the CFO,
Mm-hmm.
whereas PR reports to the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, I don't say that was always the case. So, what solution do you have?
When I came to Qiagen, the PR person reported to the CFO and the IR person reported to the CEO. I've never ever seen that before. What you move to, in my experience, is to a solid line, dotted line. Yeah? Or in certain ways, I have two solid lines, one to the CEO and one to the CFO. And the CFO knows, I know, CFO knows, CEO knows that when we're dealing with investor issues, the CEO is kind of handling these day-to-day topics. The larger overall branding, stakeholder communications issues, employee communications, these types of things, I go to the CEO. But again, it comes back to the people. The CEO and CFO at my company get along really well. Their relationship is worth its weight in gold to me. That makes my relationship with them ever more valuable for me to be able to work with them. If you work at a company where the CEO and the CFO call each other Herr Doctor and talk in Z and don't really get along, this is never going to fly. It's never going to fly. If you go back to my earlier statement, it's about people, not structures. And if the people match, then you can move into this kind of environment. But the challenge is that the stakeholders are going to force this on organizations. But I would say, because you're going to see more and more people tripping up. They say one thing to the financial community, and then the employees say, what are you talking about in terms of the synergy numbers and the job cuts that you're planning? Yeah? So it's a very simple example how M&A deals are handled. That the IR people sit there and write questions with the money bags in their mind and want to flex some and stress some cost synergy number. And then none of that's reflected in the way that you talk to the internal communications. And then you have people worried about their jobs at their sites. And then you have no movement, nobody working at a site until you get it resolved. These are these Eigentours that you cause inside by not moving towards this type of approach. What's interesting is that when I went back through this Korn Ferry survey, it showed these kind of percentages of people who responded to it, you can't add the numbers up, are doing something beyond investor relations in their job or their function. So you can already see this trend that 39% are somehow involved in corporate communications. Yeah? To your point about the reporting lines, you can see a lot of them are the CFO, but also a fair number of the CEO. And then you can see the people who are sub-level here. But what's interesting is you see public relations, internal communications, marketing. My bet is that in 5 years, those numbers are going to come way out wider. They're going to have a lot more integration of these teams. Because the dirty secret too, which I haven't mentioned yet, is cost synergies. Because if I have a head of IR and I have a head of PR at a high level in an organization, and I can combine those two roles, and I can take out one of the headcount, you start to drive real cost synergies.
So in your opinion,
That's the Dreddit, Shakespearean Dreddit negative.
In your opinion, who will become the corporate communications superhead, the head of IR or the head of PR?
That's the next slide. And I'm actually almost done slide-wise, is because I looked at this slide from the study too, and I said 48% of the people want to be the head of IR. And I was like, dull job? Because I just spent an hour before coming in here. I should have shown you that. That was more interesting. I was on the phone with our internal communications team going through new social media apps to talk to employees. Through Yabber and something called Jive we're playing with to be able to communicate with people. Blasting out emails is kind of dead. Intranets are dead. It's all about creating these social media apps to be able to get people to engage and talk to each other. That was exciting, more exciting than talking to being on Roadshow yesterday. And this job here, head of investor relations, I think this is the job that's going to disappear. I don't like this title, chief communications officer. I think it's obnoxious to say that, this title, but I think this is the job of the future, the head of integrated communications. I didn't put it up here, but it's the role model for me is a guy named Jim Mazzola, M-A-Z-Z-O-L-A. And Jim is early 50s, older than me, but I have gray hair. And he was the head of communication. He was actually at the Vorstand level of a company called CareFusion. CFN was the ticker, and they got bought by Becton Dickinson. And he's the guy I'm being kind of put under pressure to look at his role. He's in charge of marketing communications. He has branding under him. He has investor relations, corporate communications, and he's got marketing too. And now he's at a new company because that one got bought out. But this is where these roles just go beyond just bundling up IR and PR. And that's the next step of rolling these things out. Because but what you need to find are these people who have the expertise. So the long answer to your question, the long way to your question is you got to have the IR experience. Yeah? That's often what you see with these job adverts when they put these out for these integrated roles, or when headhunters call me to talk about, well, how would you structure these jobs and stuff? And I would say, well, the knockout KO criteria is you have to have IR experience. If you don't have IR experience, don't even consider the person for the job. Because then you're also, to be honest, the CFO and these people aren't going to take him, they're not going to take him seriously. And that's that rivalry with the communications people in terms of flexing. Well, we know how the investors think. But at the same time, I say you have to have done time on the communication side. And that's where my advice would be to find ways to do those rotations through, even if it's just 6 months, into those other departments. Find those projects where you can learn media relations, where you can learn branding, where you can work on corporate publishing together with them. Learn social media. Because those skills are becoming just as, they're not as important as IR, but they're coming up. And the guy at GSK getting that job as head of communications and investor relations, corporate affairs at GSK, not having been the IR guy, because he replaced a guy that I knew who was a former sell-side analyst who went into that role and bundled everything up. That was the first time I ever saw that. Because if you think about, like, Syngenta has an integrated communications team too, and when they combined, they took the IR guy. So you can, this is my kind of my prediction. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 5, maybe I'm wrong. I just think this IR role is going to get bundled up into a larger corporate affairs type role. So in closing, make friends. They're not enemies with the people in communications. They have a lot to offer you. Capture the benefits for your company of working closer together, even on an informal basis. Yeah? Because, and also, take it as the opportunity to improve your career chances, because these two disciplines are moving together, or moving back together again at a very strong pace. Okay? Thank you very much. Any Q&A?
About this, let's call it vision or theory of circle back. Are there consultants out there who tell the C-level that this is the way to do it? Or is it your personal experience?
No, you see the
Work better?
you see the headhunters, you see C-level people wanting to go to this. It's a question also from a C-level perspective about what you call span of control. Yeah? If you're a CEO or a CFO and you have 2 headcount tied up with communications and investor relations reporting directly to you, and I can merge that together into one position to take care of this issue, which in the end is a cost center for me. Yeah? And I can spend more time dealing with other issues, then it's a win. But the challenge is finding people who can deal with these topics at an expertise level and handle that with the level of impact that is expected from shareholders. See what I'm saying? So that they can, that functional expertise and the soft skills of being able to lead these larger, more diverse, divergent teams together. So it's span of control on one side, that they can reduce that, and that's where the push is coming from, and that's why the search is on for these types of positions, but it's a question as to how many people there are. And the opposite argument is that people say, well, we need to hear more directly what the IR person is saying about what's happening with investors, and the PR person says, well, you need to hear what the media person. And the solution is somebody comes in and says, here's what the media, here's what the investors are saying, here's what the employees are saying, here's what the customers are saying, and you wrap it together in one package. But again, right now, it's a question of what I see is the people who can take on these types of roles.
I think one other way to package is also to look at it from a disaster recovery perspective. Because in particular when something like this tweet happens, or when one of your factories blow up, you don't have the time to, discuss communication. So even if these different divisions are not talking to each other, to go the first step and make them talk to each other is exactly that point.
Yeah. That's what we were trying to do back in 1998 at BASF. And we went so far at my current company where we integrated them all into one team. Anybody from Lufthansa here in the room? No one? It was an interesting discussion. You talk about this in terms of a disaster situation. We're going back through and I wanted to take a look at how Lufthansa communicated this through different stakeholder channels. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a flight attendant, and I got it confirmed by a pilot. They never got one internal email from employees about the Germanwings crash.
Yeah.
Why wasn't there an ad hoc sent? Yeah? Isn't this an ad hoc relevant DGAP event in terms of the crash? So this is what happens when you start to, because that's where I'm always looking at these things where you get these splintered, fractured events. And I mean, these events, and you see the splintered, fractured approach towards communications. Back to your question, that's where the tension is always, is it too much communications power or too much wrapped into one position? Or is it too much buffering? Or is there a way to efficiently create that? Again, it goes back to people. Yep.
If I may, in the IR discipline, we always look to the US where they teach us something that's innovative again. Do you feel a difference between the US awareness of that kind of recon version versus Europe, or is it more Europe that thinks that way?
I think the US is further along in terms of integrating teams, and it's driven from a cost synergy perspective. Yeah? And it's also driven by, again, span of control in terms of management attention devoted to this topic. IR functions in Europe are more of an internal information collection point than I would say in US companies. That's why, look at BASF, I mean, 16 to 20 people in the team. When I was there, they had 2. Yeah? But you create these manuals, these documents, these fact books. US companies run a lot leaner and meaner. I was talking to a friend of mine who works at J&J, and the chairman there is a former guy I know from years ago at BASF, from Novartis. He does 2 roadshows a year. That's it. Yeah? And he doesn't want to deal with this stuff. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but they see there's not as much intensity around the IR issue. The one topic we haven't touched here is passive investing. Are investors really matter anymore? Percentage of passive investments right now is 25%, even higher in the United States. ETFs are the rage. Active investment, what's the trend? Does it really matter what your investors say? Except when it comes to a governance issue.
What's the reaction at the capital market? I mean, when you install a chief communication officer, you basically bump the head of IR down a notch, and doesn't this diminish his clout when he has to talk to the capital market?
It's a very good question, and I think it's the one that I'd say this is the approach that works the best way that's taken. What I see of companies in this kind of mid to large cap range that I see in my industry, I'd say most of the guys at the companies, I mean guys, male and female, they have this kind of role, and they split this, and they spend 56% of their time on the IR side as the first point of contact for those big investors. You cannot, to your point, go down that far, leveling down to the primary IR contact person. It just doesn't work. So I'd say this is the kind of the primary approach you see where the head, again, has to have that IR experience. They spend the primary time on IR. Actually, what do you think the number 2 priority for me is? Internal or external communications? Internal. Internal. And this is the model that works the best, I would say. Yeah?
I just wanted to add that you see another development when you look at German DAX companies. So IR does not become part of communications, but there's an IR plus department, but IR, is responsible for investor relations and corporate strategy, M&A, corporate development, sustainability, corporate governance. So not communications, but it moves in other directions. So it becomes a bigger function, but it's not drifting towards communications.
Then I go back to my
So
cover.
this is a bit, contradictory to what you said.
I know, and I don't understand that because this is the big gap I see, is getting these pieces to work together. That's the big thing. Governance, sustainability, M&A. I don't want to know what the M&A team's working on as the IR guy. I don't want to be put in that conflict situation.
There are companies where the head of IR is also the head of M&A.
Yeah, and I have also going to business development. But I think the natural link, the piece that fits in the puzzle, is communications, internal communications, branding, external communications, social media. This is the natural lockstep area of linking with IR, because IR came out of this function area. It grew out of this area and became its standalone area because of the capital markets demands, and now it's coming back together. I'm not against that, but I think if you don't pick up the core, then you're still missing, what's so obvious to me. Yep.
What was the reason why the two functions grew apart? Wasn't it that there were, as you probably mentioned earlier, there wasn't a single person or a single type of individual who could cover all the skills and expertise that you need in order to provide for both functions.
Mm-hmm.
That's why IR became a separate function, and that hasn't changed. I mean, most the thing that I, as an advisor, see is that most communications people don't understand valuation. They don't understand financials, and they don't want to.
Yeah.
So if you want to have someone who can talk to the market, be that sell side or buy side, you need someone who does want to do that.
Yep. It's painful.
And that's probably the primary reason why these two functions grew apart.
And that's why I'm urging more companies. Sorry, you want to say something?
I mean, the question would then be exactly, is it now also vice versa? Do we as IR people don't want to think about communication? We have to think about communication. It's our opportunity to become the head of this function because we understand financial, but also have to take care of communications anyhow.
Because IR, in the end, is telling, if I get my slide, a story. And they have a seminar here on IR storytelling. This is where IR people fail miserably, collapse. I could do a presentation on why sell-side analysts, sorry to insult anybody, really have trouble integrating into these teams. The best people come from marketing. Yeah, the best people come from marketing. They know how to tell a story. It's a product that we're pitching. But that's why I advocate, and also career-wise, making lateral move from PR into from communications into IR. And then going back and forth and trying to get people at the companies I worked at to be able to make these lateral moves. It's very hard, very painful. They think they're, oh my God, I'm giving it up. Oh my God, I'm not going to be as important at the table in that role as this role. I don't know the math, these kinds of things. And these are these stereotypes that are being broken down step by step in these companies. My team, every person on my team, especially the PR people, they go out on 2 roadshows a year with me. 1 to 2 roadshows a year. Now we're at the point, after 5 years, where I can have an inbound visit today from an investor. They can handle the meeting, especially on a first level investor meeting. We're not getting into numbers with a guy. They want to hear the story. They want to hear what's your pitch. Yeah? And that's where sometimes I hear those stereotypes, but it's time to break through those and move people around. Any other comments, questions, concerns, negative feedback? Okay. I think that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Something to think about.